Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our town council meeting of February 20th. Rebecca, will you please call to order?
Councilmember Andrews.
Present.
Councilmember Bailey.
Here.
Councilmember Ravazio.
Here.
Vice Mayor First.
Here.
Mayor Condon.
Here. Thank you. And if you'll all join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. At the end of last session's meeting, we had two closed items. And on the first, I have nothing to report. And on the second, there's nothing to support except that we did give staff direction on how to proceed. Now it's open time for public comment, and this is your opportunity to speak on anything you like that is not on tonight's agenda. And you'll be given 3 minutes, and would anybody like to speak? Seeing none, I will close it to public comment. We have no presentations tonight. And on to the consent calendar. And the purpose of the consent calendar is to group items together which are routine or have been discussed previously and do not need further discussion. They can be approved by a single motion. Also, if anyone, member of the council, staff, or the public wants to pull an item, you may do so at this time. Is there anyone that wants to pull an item? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar 4.1 through 4.1.9.
So moved. Second.
Councilmember Andrews.
Yes.
Councilmember Bailey.
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio.
Yes.
Vice Mayor First.
Yes.
Mayor Condon.
Yes. Okay, and then we will move on to the consent calendar for the sanitary district items. And here we just have one item. Is there anybody from the public, from council or staff that would like to pull that item? Seeing none, I will entertain an item to approve.
Move to approve
Second.
4.2.1. Gee, way to interrupt me.
Board Member Andrews.
Yes.
Board Member Bailey.
Yeah.
Board Member Ravazio.
Yes.
Vice President First.
Yes.
President Condon.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Don't choke.
Sorry.
Good cookies.
And then on to the public hearings. The first one is to consider introducing an ordinance to be approved by the voters at the June 15th, 2018 election. And that one would extend the current sales tax, which was formerly voted on as Measure B. And there are several options that we have that will be presented. And Town Manager Cusimano, would you like to begin, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I'd like to introduce our Public Works Director, Peter Brown, and Peter and I will be giving the staff report. And tonight, the purpose of this report and agenda item, we're asking council to consider one of three options. And the first is to introduce an ordinance that extends the sales tax measure until it is repealed by the voters by increasing the sales tax level from 1/2 cent to 3/4 cents. It also repeals the existing storm drainage special tax of $98 per residential unit and 1,000 square feet of commercial. The second option for council to consider is to introduce an ordinance that extends the sales tax measure at the existing 1/2 cent level until it is repealed by the voters. Or the third option for council to consider is allowing the existing 1/2 cent sales tax to sunset in April of 2020. Over the last few council meetings, staff has continued a conversation regarding the town's infrastructure and the sales tax measure and really all revenues for the town. And a quick summary again for everyone on the sales tax measure B, the 1/2 cent sales tax measure. On November 5th, 2013, the Corte Madera voters approved Measure B by 68%. That is a general transaction and use tax, local sales tax per state law, and it requires a simple majority passage of 50% plus one. And so this really was an overwhelmingly supported measure back in 2013. Measure B was implemented in April of 2014, and it's set to expire again on April 1st of 2020. This is a 6-year local sales tax measure. When the council placed this measure on the ballot in 2013, it adopted general guidelines stating that the primary purpose of revenue is to maintain essential services, including but not limited to the 6 areas on page 2 of the report. And those are current levels of local fire prevention, flood control, streets and potholes, disaster preparedness, safe routes to schools, and senior and youth programs. The town has kept that commitment to the voters, with revenue being spent in only those areas as outlined. The purpose of, and again, those are reviewed by the Sales Tax Citizens Oversight Committee, who reviews this on an annual basis, and their reports are located on our website, and there's also a link in our staff report. We have recently met with the Oversight Committee, and we have a few committee members here tonight. As we discussed in the past, and why we're taking this to council now is we believe as staff that we have an opportunity to discuss and to begin to prepare for the considerable infrastructure and maintenance needs that we have in our town. We're very unique in the Bay Area, where we have really intensive, extensive flood control, street repair and maintenance, fire prevention, disaster preparedness. We're really susceptible to flooding, earthquake, and wildland fires, all 3 of the major disasters that we could possibly be faced with. We also have a real serious need for new public facilities and programs for youth and our aging population. We really broke down the report, and I'm going to have Peter cover that, but we broke down the report in 2 areas, and we try to focus on first, as we know, the 6-year measure, we're estimating $15 million in revenues over that 6-year span. Between now and 2020, we have approximately 16 projects totaling $11 million. And so we have some really serious infrastructure needs in front of us between now and 2020. But when we really expand that out another 10 years to 2030, our infrastructure needs balloon to $53 million. And those are conservative numbers. And we want to talk about that a little bit in this report and really explain some of the concerns that we have and why we're recommending what we are to the council for consideration. And I think we're uniquely positioned as a town because this sales tax measure, over 90% of it is paid for by people outside of our community that enjoy our shopping centers, that enjoy our community. 90% of these revenues are paid by those outside of the community. And so it gives us an opportunity to share our infrastructure needs with people that enjoy our community, who bring traffic to our community. And it provides us a revenue stream that we control 100% locally. The proposed ordinance, and again, you have 2 ordinances in front of you. One is, and this is the one that we're discussing right now. The proposed ordinance, it's attachment 1. It's a 3/4 cent tax, so it's raising the sales tax measure from a 1/2 cent to 3/4 cent. And we believe it empowers the town to meet our immediate needs of $11 million in capital improvement infrastructure between now and 2020, and up to $50 million by 2030. It also allows us to consider sunsetting in the same motion. So if you were to, in the first ordinance, attachment 1, it's really asking 3 things. Raise the sales tax from a 1/2 cent to 3/4 cent. Immediately sunset, and we'll talk about this, July 1st of 2018, the flood control tax. And then continue that tax measure until it is repealed, or until it was voted by the voters to repeal that. So on page 3, discussion. Really, I want to start this discussion with flood control, and then I'm going to turn it over to Peter to really talk about the capital improvement projects. But Corte Madera is vulnerable to flooding. Over 32% of the town's homes are within the FEMA 100-year flood zone. And while Madera Gardens and Mariner Cove neighborhoods are the areas at most immediate flooding risk, the higher elevations of town will find accessed by emergency services, and residents will be severely hampered by such flooding. And since 1982, 1982, we showed a photo. Do we still have that? We showed it at the last meeting. It really sets the stage because I think as a town, I know some citizens have become complacent and they forget about the 1982 floods. And we've really been lucky over the past years because of what we put into our infrastructure to make sure 1982 doesn't happen again. You know, a lot of the conversations you hear through the Ross Valley, that's where we were back in 1982, and we're not there today because of some of the steps that we've taken as a town. So I want to cover those. We've invested over $20 million plus in our current flood control infrastructure to prevent this. And there is a mistake, and I'll cover it. But the first one is the storm drain system. We have over 47 linear miles of storm drainage system in place right now. We currently have 6,550 linear feet of canals. The report says miles, it's actually feet. Thank you, Nathan Blomberg, for bringing that to our attention. Currently, within our levees, we have 10,400 linear feet of levees. We have 11 pump stations that are anywhere from $750,000 to $1 million in replacement cost. We have 15 gate stations, 6 retention basins, and 1 detention basin. So in 2007, we had a flood control study that evaluated the town's current system and provided some recommendations and cost estimates. And what they did is they looked at our current system and said, really, to continue our current system, we're looking at about $800,000 to $1 million in annual maintenance cost to keep it running. Approximately $18 million in capital improvements and enhancements to the current system. That includes the 4 to 5 additional pump stations to complete our overall infrastructure that was actually recommended over 20 years ago. And they also estimate about $20 million in new levee improvements on the north and east sides of town. Pretty extensive, and so that is before us, and really, this infrastructure doesn't fully speak to what Peter talked about at the last few meetings of sea level rise. And so Vice Mayor First really put together a really detailed PowerPoint presentation, and we hope in March to begin that conversation on top of what I just talked about of over $28 million, $38 million in flood infrastructure, not really solving the big picture deal of sea level rise, and to really take that PowerPoint that Vice Mayor started and really start that conversation with our community of what is the big picture problem, our vulnerabilities, what's the big picture solution, funding mechanisms, and how are we going to handle that. That is outside of what we're talking about tonight, and so I can't emphasize that enough. And that's just on the flood control portion. With the capital improvements, I'm going to ask Peter to cover that.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, Peter Brown, Public Works Department. Thank you, Mr. Cusmano, for that introduction to the issue before us all tonight. I will point out also that staff report 5.1, we put extra copies in the back of the room, and we are kind of walking through that staff report. If members of the public would like to grab a copy, they're on the back table. So really, what the story that you've been hearing over your past 3 or 4 meetings now is twofold. One of the significant cost and need that we have in our small town in terms of transportation, flood control, infrastructure needs. I'll remind everyone that our most recent pump station was built in 1999. That's our newest one. So it's 20 years old, and after the 1982 flood, between 82 and the mid 90s is really when all these flood control pump stations went in, and those, all capital assets have useful life, and we've done well to maintain those, but it'd be pretty hard to look at the next 12 to 15 years without understanding that some of those are going to need to be fully replaced. Maintenance won't do it in the long term. So one of the things that I like to remember is that, Corte Madera is in this unique position whereby we have a great opportunity, this funding source, if the council and then the voters choose to renew it. We have a significant source of funds because of our regional shopping nature. And as Corte Madera residents are aware, some of them anyway, for every dollar that is spent by a Corte Madera resident, $9 can be leveraged from regional population bases. So that's really critical. In terms of opportunity. The 3 categories, again, and this is from the PowerPoint that we looked at last time we met. ongoing projects. So if we just look at the near term, between 2018 and 2020, those are totaled at around $11 million in those three categories. So the 5 projects for flood control total around $4.6 million, and those are all capital improvements that are set to improve neighborhoods and reduce flood risk. The transportation safety improvements, safe routes to school type projects, those are listed 1 through 6 there, and they total about $6 million. 2 really big ticket items that we're looking to complete in the next 3 years or so. Casa Buena, complete streets, sidewalks, bike lanes, the length of Casa Buena, that's about a $2.2 million project. And we've begun work on the Tamil Vista Complete Streets project. I actually discussed that with the BPAC committee last week and got some feedback from them. So there's 66% of your near-term expenditures. And then facilities, these are the ones we have ongoing. There's another item later today, will be another facilities improvement. But the need is there, totaling, again, around $11 million in ongoing projects. The real question is the future, right? So, and that's what this next section really gets at. If we look at 2020 to 2030, we're estimating over $40 million in potential need. That doesn't mean we are for sure going to spend that money. I just want to remind everyone that we definitely have a need for that ballpark. And again, I don't want to go into too much more detail, but we kind of outlined the categories in your report. Transportation and flood control, safe routes to school specific projects, potholes, senior and youth programs we know are really important to the community, and those deserve more investment. We've heard that from our Citizens Oversight Committee. And then, as Mr. Cusmano pointed out, disaster preparedness and fire prevention, we would be remiss after the 2017 year, the most severe in California state history in terms of fire impacts, to not really have this on our radar in terms of disaster preparedness of all types. So I know Mr. Cusmano wanted to talk briefly about the fiscal impact, and then the last thing we'll do in this staff report is kind of walk you through this comparison of your choice between a half and a 3/4 cent.
Thanks, Peter. And again, something we've talked about in the last few meetings and at the Oversight Committee meeting. As a town manager staff, fiscally being prudent and really looking at the sales tax measure and looking really at the $11 million of projects headed our way, really trying to ensure that we can complete those projects by 2020 and using the sales tax money for that. And then using disaster preparedness, senior youth programs, taking that from the general fund. And there's been a lot of conversation of the differences between the two. And I define those items of being revolving, something we want to continue from a year-to-year basis, finding a way to put that into your general fund budget that's approved every year to ensure that we have it. We would take a different strategy if we knew that we had a sales tax revenue for a longer period of time. We could supplement prevention and other items from year to year between the operating budget and the sales tax measure. So we'd handle that differently. And really, you have a more robust budget, going forward. I think some of the things that we're excited about is really enhancing our staffing levels for fire marshal and prevention services, ensuring that we have good programs for the hillside on maintenance and so forth, and as well as the intergenerational center, and really speaking and preparing ourselves for our aging population in Corte Madera. So again, Peter's going to cover the considerations between the half-cent versus the 3/4 cent renewal, and really what we're looking at, and just to start it off, and if you look on page 4, under considerations, we really looked at between 2018 and 2030, and we said, okay, we have approximately $53 million in projects. Not to say we're going to do them all, but that is in front of us. Those are projects that will have to get done in that time frame or close to. If you look at the current half-cent revenue, it's estimated to be about 25 to 30 million in that time frame. So we're short. Not the end of the world. This is still a good revenue stream for us, very successful. But if you look at the 3/4 cent, it gets us closer. It's approximately 40 to 44 million of the 53 that's needed. And it still falls short, but as Peter said, it positions us to have shovel-ready projects and a matching funding source that'll help us get to that $53 million. And that's important, and that's the $10 million difference that we believe that we can reach if we have a 3/4 cent sales tax. It also positions us, staff has done a lot of studies and really looked at this. We believe strongly that if we go to a 3/4 cent sales tax, that council could consider placing on the ballot at the same time repealing the flood tax. The flood tax, again, sunsets in 2023. It would take, in 2023, a 2/3 vote for renewal. And really, I think, as we talked about, it's going to be a different conversation in 2023 as we start the discussion of sea level rise and we move forward. And so staff is recommending, if council were to consider a 3/4 cent sales tax, that's option 1, it's attachment 1. Within that same ordinance, you would be sunsetting immediately the $98 flood tax measure. And with that, you want to take the rest?
Just to wrap up here the last couple minutes, what we tried to do in this comparison between half and 3/4 cent is really lay out the options for you. How much money would come in? Our need stays the same. Remember, between now and 2030, we're looking at that $50 to $53 million in total need. It's a big, big price tag for a community that's right up against the bay. So, clearly, with each of those two options, we get closer to getting fully funding our needs with the 3/4 cent. And so the $10 million unfunded need, that's something that we feel comfortable in partnering with other agencies and looking for grant funds, deferring the projects that absolutely don't need to be built. That's a number that we can deal with. When you get to only funding about half of your need and 50% or $25 million is unfunded, that's where, as infrastructure professional and your public works director, I begin to come a little concerned in terms of our ability to meet those needs. And then the last thing that I'll say about this, and I know Todd mentioned it briefly, but what would happen with either of these first two ordinances before you, aside from the sunsetting option, is you'd be placing a measure on the ballot that mostly asks local residents to tax themselves, either at the continuing existing half-cent rate or at a 3/4 cent rate. And that's not an easy thing to do. It's not a popular thing to do, but I think that when we tie it to the special drainage tax, and we really look at local impact, I think one of the things it does is it gives residents an incentive. It's actually a fiscal incentive, and that's what we did in items 4 and 5, is similar to our discussion on the PowerPoint 2 weeks ago. We really broke down the net average change per resident, which I'll remind you, if we go from half cent to 3/4 cent, we look at going from $26 per resident per year to $39 in expenditures. So that's the total amount of increased expenditures that would come. The difference between those two is about $13 per resident. When you connect it to the $98 annual special drainage tax, that's something that ends up being a greater savings. So in this particular case, the way it's been set up, there's an opportunity for voters to actually put money in their pockets while ensuring sound future funding sources for capital improvements. So that, again, is at least in our opinion, a pretty unique situation that Corte Madera voters are in. So that concludes our report, and I'm sure that either Todd or I are happy to take any questions from you all.
Thank you, Peter. First of all, with the council, are there any questions?
Yes. One issue is the length of the tax and that it's basically indefinite. Am I correct in thinking that when you're doing capital budgeting, you need to have an understanding 2 or 3 years in advance of what your funding sources will be when doing your planning?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Andrews, that's a fine question. I think that the way that it's drafted, and of course, it's your direction. So we've given you two options that look at allowing the sunset period to be to go away. That doesn't necessarily have to be the course of action that you all take. The advantage to that is that it's in the voters' hands. The voters can, ask that it come back and take action at any future date. From an actual capital planning standpoint, I think, what I would do is look at having us go to the 5-year CIP program with 2 years fiscally bound. So that wouldn't change. If we were to do, let's say we were to ask it to be sunset in 2030 or 2040, I would still recommend that we look at that 2-year fiscal constraint with a 5-year long-term plan, and we would continue with that regardless of what the sunset date was. If we were then approaching, say, a 2030 sunset date, that's when in 2025 or 2027 you'd start to have this discussion again.
What I would say from a fiscal standpoint of just looking at the town infrastructure, this is key. Before the recession that hit and brought us where we got to in 2013 for this measure, even before that, without this type of revenue stream, we were not positioned as a town before the recession, during it, or after it, to prepare for what we face infrastructure-wise. This is really something that we've identified that it's a kind of a must-have. And without it, we're going to have to figure out a funding stream in the future to offset it. And we really feel like it's appropriate that it be shared with 90% of outside of our community that enjoy the greatness of our community. We think this is appropriate, and that's why by raising it to 3/4 cent, we feel it's appropriate then to look at all of our taxing measures, and it's appropriate to consider sunsetting the flood tax. But it's something that we need to understand when we plan for the future, that we have this long term, if that answers your question.
Yeah, in terms of timing of when the tax, if it is passed by the voters in June, when would the increased sales tax show up?
July, right?
Yeah, so the way that we've drafted the proposed ordinance is the trigger would be July 1st of this year for both options. In other
Okay.
words, the sales tax rate would change on July 1st, and because of the storm drainage tax cycle, which begins in the fiscal year, July 1 to June 31, those are the bills that you receive, say, in December and April, when
Okay.
your property taxes are due. Those would go away at the same time. But July 1, 2018 would be the trigger date.
Okay.
Thank you for your spreadsheet. That was helpful.
Any other questions? Did you have one?
I do, but I'll wait till after public comment.
Okay. Public comment. Does anybody have any question from the public? No? Then I will close it.
Okay.
Oh,
Very quickly.
sorry, Jane.
Jean Greenbaum, I don't think I saw anything in there about an oversight committee, citizens oversight at all. I don't know if is that included in there? Okay.
If it's not, we'll add it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, I will close it to the public comment and bring it back to the council.
I'll ask a question. Is that all right?
Sure, now go ahead.
I don't know which of you gentlemen will know the answer to this, but have you done any analysis about whether there's an impact on our local businesses by the marginal increase to the sales tax?
Yeah, I met with the chamber recently, and we had a conversation about this. And they were supportive of going from 1/2 cent, 3/4 cent, and I asked them of any negative impacts that they saw compared to other cities and towns. Would, for instance, if you raised it a 1/4 cent, do they think, based on any analysis, would shoppers go somewhere else?
Yes.
And it wasn't a concern from the standpoint of the shopping centers. So that was the group I met with, and so limited impact in their mind, and they're supportive
Okay.
of such a measure.
I think that's an important point, frankly. Thank you.
And I think one advantage, too, for shopping here is we're the only place where you could come and shop and you don't have to put money in the meter. So I think it really kind of balances the whole thing.
And then, Madam Mayor, if I may, a little advice from legal counsel about the question from the public. Typically, what we do in this particular case is we look at changes to the existing ordinance. So those are the things we would highlight. Absent any changes, say, for example, the Citizens Oversight Committee, that's in the existing, and so that would continue, and so would all other provisions of how we spend the money and how we allocate it. So we're only looking at the changes before you today. And then to Councilmember Bailey's question, typically in an area like ours in Southern Marin, the choices you make about your shopping experience, where you want to buy a car, whether you want to go to REI or Big Five, those are typically driven by the type of amenity you're looking for. It's very rare that a consumer will go, well, I think, Fairfax has an 8.75% rate and Corte Madera has 9%, and probably looking at a $50 item, so I'm going to drive out to Fairfax.
No, and
it's
that's
a
a
complex
solid point.
yeah.
I was wondering if it was more from the other end, is that if you're a business considering coming to Corte Madera and you are comparing what our tax rate is to surrounding communities,
Sure.
whether we're marginally higher or not, if that makes a difference to them.
And that question was asked, and from the shopping center standpoint, because they recruit people to come to the center, it would not, we're still a prime area
Good.
for that. And I did ask from a as we talked about taxes in general, just from the commercial business perspective, what were the taxes that concerned them?
Yeah.
And the ones that concerned them, it wasn't the sales tax actually of what we're talking about, because again, it takes it to a 9% overall level, so it wasn't an overly high level comparatively to others. They had concerns about the sanitary district fees and tax, and we're going to talk about that later in the year. And they also had concerns about keeping the TOT numbers where they were. So those were the two, and the flood tax, because the flood tax, again, it's $98 per 1,000 square foot commercial. Those were the three that they would like to see stay the same or go away.
Okay, so that's good information, thank you.
Okay, any other comments? So then we need to
Well,
give you, yeah.
I'd like to make some comments. I don't have any questions.
No, that's right.
Okay, great. I just looked up, and San Rafael is at 9%. And I believe there are at least 2 other cities in Marin that are also at 9%. So we would not be an outlier.
Good.
And I believe Fairfax is actually one of them that's at 9. And Larkspur's at 9. And then San Rafael, which is, another big shopping destination, they're at 9. So I don't think this is going to put us in any kind of a
Competitive disadvantage.
disadvantage. I think the point that was brought up about capital planning and being able to look at the revenue stream longer term is a really, really important one, because these projects that need to be done, especially the flood control projects, they are really big, really expensive. It's going to take many years to plan and actually get them built. So having a dedicated revenue stream is really going to be key. I joined the council in '09 when we were in the middle of the economic downturn, and we were not spending money on anything, which is why when we were starting to come out of it, we originally wanted to do this sales tax override. But I don't think we're ever going to get back to the way things used to be, where the state and the federal governments would kick in money for infrastructure. Paving roads, building roads and sidewalks, and, even flood control. We're not going to have that. We are very much going to be on our own. If you think of how many other communities are going to need to address sea level rise and flooding, there's just not going to be enough money from federal and state coffers to do that. So I think I would like to see us consider going out for the 3/4, offsetting it by eliminating the storm drain tax. I think is something that will take a little bit of effort to educate people about, but I think that is a really key selling point. I agree, we must have a Citizens Oversight Committee. I do not want this to become a slush fund, but I haven't heard that in any discussion I've had with staff or anybody else. I think we are acknowledging that this pot of money is going to be going into really important infrastructure and capital needs, and prevention, fire prevention and other similar type projects here in the town. So anyway, that's where I stand.
Thank you.
I mean, we can have more, it's non-controversial to me, there's nothing more significant and consistent with our mission than to help protect our citizens from natural disasters and flooding and whatnot, so I'll make a motion unless somebody else wants to
Well,
talk
why don't we
about it.
just go, because this
Okay.
is a pretty big thing. Bob or Jim, do you want to go next?
No, I've been encouraging Todd and Peter to bring this up for months, so.
Thank you.
And Jim, you're
Thanks,
supportive, you're supportive of the whole thing.
Of which option, though?
Which option?
Oh, the 3/4.
Yeah.
Well, extend, increase, and repeal.
Repeal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bob?
I got to tell you, I was a little reticent about this as I walked in tonight and as I read the report, and I think because, like Diane and you, I've spent a long time on doing this, and when we first started dealing with this kind of stuff in 2000, when we were dealing with the recession and no money, and cutting everything, this overwhelming need was never talked about. And I guess what's happened is it seems like we have new staff who's been able to articulate the need and quantify the need and really point it out. And I do not doubt for 1 second that it exists. And I think you have made excellent points, all of you. Diane, I love the point. You're absolutely right. We're going to be on our own, right, in the next foreseeable future. State and federal money is drying up for this kind of stuff, pardon the pun. And I'm really happy that unlike a lot of the other, we see other communities in Marin County having a really hard time with flood control. We've got a plan, and we know how difficult it's going to be. So I think this is the right thing to do. I'm a little concerned about the complexity of explaining this to the voters, this whole, we got to renew the tax, we're going to increase the tax. Oh, and by the way, we're also going to repeal this other tax. We're going to have to work really hard to make sure that we get that communicated properly to people, because it's a lot to kind of bite off and think about. Having said all that, I'm supportive of it as well, and thank you for your opinions. That really helps.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, I think that, as Bob said, really explaining it clearly to the public is going to be the hardest thing to do. Because when you look at how the money balances out, you end up with more money in your pocket. And also, when you look at pictures like this, during this time, the prices in Corte Madera, the home prices, were a lot lower. And once we've got the infrastructure in place that we have now, all of a sudden, Corte Madera is really a very, very desirable place to live, and that's reflected in the crazy house prices that are being generated and selling that way. And to jeopardize the infrastructure, we're jeopardizing the value of all the properties in the town, as far as I'm concerned. I think that with the semantics, to make sure people understand that repealing the one storm drainage tax, that they have to know what that means. Repeal, that means as of July 1st, it's off your bill. It's gone. So that they can see, oh, well, I'm just paying a little bit more sales tax, but this $98 chunk is gone. So I think that we need to be very mindful of the semantics that everybody understands, even if we can think of, what did we say, increase, repeal, what were the three things?
Extend, increase, repeal.
Right. To understand that in the end, that equal sign is better for us and better for the town. And that there really isn't any downside to this measure. So I would certainly join in the support of this. And I think that I would be very hopeful that we get a strong support from our voters on this.
Madam Mayor, if I may, to a couple of points that we heard from council, and we'd like to take this opportunity to remind the community that we agree with you. The community outreach and the engagement will be critical. And we've already scheduled Saturday of March 31st from 10 to noon at the community center for our first community-wide conversation on this. And that's a Saturday, late morning. Not everybody can make Saturday. We've also scheduled for the following Wednesday, April 4th, from 6 to 8 p.m. for those of you who it may be easier to come after work, again at the community center. And we invite all Corte Madera and local residents to come out and ask the tough questions and really attempt to grasp that. And we'll do our best to do what you've articulated well in terms of clarifying what this conversation means. And because I follow the transportation funding, the infrastructure funding, and I heard several of you mention the state and federal sources aren't likely to be there. I'll give you one example. This infrastructure bill that you've heard talked about at the national level, President Trump has proposed in several different iterations a $1.5 to $2 trillion infrastructure bill. When you read between the lines, he only wants to put about $200 billion to $250 billion worth of federal money on that. So the rest of that is to come from states, locals, private sources. So that is not something that, really gives us any security in terms of how we fund our transportation infrastructure. And to give you a comparison, in the mid-90s through the early 2000s, we had a series of 6-year transportation bills that ranged between $350 to $400 billion every 6 years. We haven't had one of those in a long time. There have been stopgap measures that have been voted to continue levels that we've seen 5 and 7 years ago. So again, the comparison there, the federal government is literally cutting their contribution in half in transportation and asking us to make up for it. So, Council obviously is, in control of that, but having a locally controlled source will be critical for you all.
It's 75 words or less. So-
Yes,
so it's-
and maybe throw in a
Gotta fit in the
picture
box.
or visual or something. But also, just to interject there, that having attended the League of California Cities conference recently, that there is, again, multi-billion dollars from SB1 that is out there again for the taking. And so I really encourage staff to go after those grants. They're available, and I'm afraid they're going to all of a sudden issue some kind of stopgap. There's talk about that, but right now, the money is available, and Corte Madera qualifies 100% for that money, partly because of our SB 35 deal, that we qualify for it, and our housing element is compliant. And so I'd say just think of a need and go out there and apply for it, because it's there. And so many of the jurisdictions don't qualify, so the money's sitting there. Okay, so then are we
Yeah,
all
I'll move that
clear?
we introduce the ordinance, alternative number 1, which extends the sales tax measure until repealed by the voters, increases the sales tax level from a half cent to 3/4 cent, and repeals the existing storm drainage special tax of $98 per residential unit and 1,000 square feet of commercial.
Second?
Councilmember Andrews.
Yes.
Councilmember Bailey.
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio.
Yes.
Vice Mayor First.
Yes.
Mayor Condon.
Yes. Okay, great, that has passed. And can I suggest also that maybe in those 75 words or less, at the beginning of each council meeting, that be mentioned? So I think that would be helpful to be able to get out to as many people as we can. Okay, so then we will move on to our town business items. The first one is discussion of hotel uses and existing land use regulations relating to hotel development, and giving possible direction to staff regarding future work related to this subject. And Adam, I will turn it over to you.
I do, actually. It's on the desktop. Thank you, Madam Mayor, council members. This evening, as you mentioned, we are here to discuss the town's existing land use regulations related to hotels, discuss whether changes should be considered, and staff is also looking for some direction from the town council regarding future work on this subject. I think, as you're well aware, there are a couple of applications that the Planning Commission recently has been working on related to redevelopment of our hotels in town. And I think staff, due to the fact that the importance, and especially from Todd's perspective, the importance of some of the TOT that these hotels bring to the town, and as well as after looking at our own land use regulations related to hotels in comparison to other communities in Marin and elsewhere, thought that it was an important time to bring this discussion to the council. We also heard from individual council members that this is something that they would like to have discussed at a public meeting. So that's why we're here this evening. And as you see in the staff report, I've laid out sort of some of the basic existing land use regulations that we have with respect to our zoning ordinance and also in our general plan. And I wasn't planning on walking through all of those, but I just wanted to make a few points regarding some of the information that we have in the staff report. And so just to start, I think it's important just to note, first off, we allow hotels in most of our commercial designations today. The C1, C2, C3 districts, and also the MX1 zoning districts. They're all allowed by conditional use permits. And those areas are basically surrounding the highways, as we've talked about in the past, the two regional shopping centers and most of the commercial development that you see along Tamalpais Drive as well. They are not currently allowed in the C4 zoning district, which is the deep purple area over here where some of the car dealerships are on San Clemente Drive. The hotels currently are sort of lumped in with other commercial uses, all other commercial uses that are permitted or conditionally permitted in these commercial areas, and have the same FAR applies to hotels as they do to these other commercial districts. I'm sort of going to skip past that slide. And in looking at these, the current FAR, I think we compared those. This is actually something that we have presented to the Planning Commission in the past. Oops. But it's in your staff report, but you'll note that Corte Madera is clearly, I'm not sure why it's doing that.
No, it's
Oh.
it's been going in and out.
Corte Madera is clearly at the lower end, if not the lowest end, in terms of FAR for hotels in Marin, but also I included some other information in a staff report that Novato prepared that shows that we've looked at other jurisdictions as well outside of Marin, and it's at the lower end of the FAR range there. As I mentioned, some jurisdictions lump hotel FAR in with other commercial uses, like Corte Madera does, and others have special regulations for hotels that are separate and apart and recognize that use as a different and somewhat special use compared to other commercial uses. I think importantly, what we pointed out in the staff report as well was that the current FAR that Corte Madera allows for its hotels generally does not reflect the existing FARs of the existing hotels. We have 4 hotels in Corte Madera, the Marin Suites and Best Western Corte Madera Inn on Tamil Vista Boulevard, and also the Budget Inn and America's Best Value Inn on Casa Buena. Budget Inn actually has a Meadow Suite address. But as you can see, with the exception of the Budget Inn, which actually, if you include the garages, but our FAR regulations does not include the garages, so you can see that one's below 0.34 FAR. The rest of them are actually above the existing regulations, which does constrain redevelopment of those existing sites with either expansion of the existing hotels that are there today, or redevelopment of the same floor area, hotels with the same floor area that they have there today on those sites. Or frankly, if there was unfortunate circumstances happened and there was those hotels were destroyed, they actually would not be able to be rebuilt at the current floor area that they have today. And you can see some of the other existing hotels that we've more recently have been built in adjacent to highway areas. The other thing, and I wanted to bring up as well, obviously one of the unique aspects of hotels is that they do have a significant revenue stream that comes directly to the town in the form of TOT taxes. There's a chart in your staff report that explains that and provides some figures over the last 3 or 4 years. Obviously, that's not the only thing that hotels do. They are also considerable economic generators for local businesses. I didn't get into it, it's widely documented in many land use papers and whatnot that they do contribute significantly to local economic development opportunities and are a resource, obviously, to that community, as well as obviously the local residents. So with that, what we had, I'm happy to answer any questions about our existing regulations. What I wanted to do was, at least for the purpose of tonight's discussion, I included a few approaches to consider. And obviously, this is really intended to be a discussion of sort of the direction that the town council may want to go on this issue. Obviously, there's the approach of retaining existing regulations that we have today. There's a second option that we include in the staff report and is shown up on the second bullet there, which sort of discusses keeping the same zoning district framework, but including in those regulations some incentives or additional allowances for FAR for hotels. This is actually similar to what we currently have in the MX1 district related to some sort of bonus for special projects or projects that meet certain requirements. And in fact, I think what I wanted to include a lot of information on the current general plan policies, because I think there's actually a lot of information related to this sort of concept in our general plan regarding infill and redevelopment of our commercial sites in town, with potentially allowing additional FAR or increased flexibility if projects meet goals for infill development on these sites. And I think there's a recognition as you read through the general plan policies related to non-residential development that recognizes that we're going to see more intense uses or redevelopment of existing sites that may be underutilized. And so some additional thinking on that needs to be examined. And I think there's another approach, which is the third bullet that wasn't in here, but which is also keeping the same zoning districts, but setting new maximums and not specifying any incentives. I think the first three up there all retain and keep existing zoning districts in place, but work within that structure that's there. And then the final one is just more in line with what we saw in terms of the application from the Corte Madera. And I don't want to get into the specifics of that, but it was essentially a new zoning district that allowed hotels only. And so this is, I think, an option that really, in conjunction with additional FAR, would be the most certain in terms of obviously getting the use of hotels and ensuring that they stay on a case-by-case basis or as applied in certain areas, stay hotels, but would also be limiting in terms of the ability of those sites and the property owners to adapt those with different uses. But it could also be an approach to retaining hotels in town, allowing for redevelopment, encouraging new hotels to come to Corte Madera. So with that, unless Todd, I don't know if you have anything else to say, but I think we'd like to engage in a discussion. Happy to answer any questions about existing regulations or any other items in the staff report. There's a couple of attachments, again, a long list of general plan policies. We also included a staff report from the city of Novato recently, where they were considering higher FARs in a particular area of town, of the city of Novato. And the staff report, I think, contains some good information there. Other than that, happy to answer questions.
Yeah, I have a question on the new hotel zoning district with new maximums.
Sure.
I had inquired about that before we did the Tamil Vista plan. And I'm wondering, is that going to be considered spot zoning? I mean, I happen to really, at that time, favor spot zoning and was told that that couldn't be done. But here it says the new hotel zoning district. Can that be interpreted as spot zoning?
You know, I think there, it's sort of a, frankly, a loaded term just to call something spot zoning. I think it's referring to the act of applying a zoning district on a particular location or in a particular area. It can be if it's done inappropriately, I think, but if it's done with an appropriate land use rationale and there's a basis for why certain sites may be more appropriate for hotels in that particular use, that is something that I think could be considered. Obviously, we're talking conceptually now, so as you develop the actual regulations, you'd want to look at it much more closely. And I think our approach, you know, I think is the idea is that we want to work with our all of our property owners to get sort of a desired sort of land uses in town, and encourage our property owners to sort of develop and redevelop in a way that fits in with our plans and our planning processes and complements existing uses. So the spot zoning has a connotation that's very sort of, I think, it's sort of working against a property owner, but I don't think that's necessarily always the case.
Madam Mayor, if I,
As I understand it, spot zoning simply means that a particular parcel is zoned differently than neighboring parcels, and it can either be zoned more favorably than neighboring parcels or less favorably than neighboring parcels. And the key thing that we have to do when zoning that way, if we ever do it, is make certain that it's in the public interest, and we have documented that it's in the public interest. Is that correct? Flown from what you?
I believe that that's correct.
Okay.
and Madam Mayor, members of the council, just really quickly, just to summarize, when you look at the transient occupancy tax for us, and the staff report, it gives you a list. Really, we bring in about $1 million annually in transit occupancy tax. 200,000 of that goes to the chamber, and the approximately 800,000 in revenue comes to the town. But that's not the only benefit to the town, right? We get people that stay in our local hotels, they shop, they eat, and they play in town. And so that's important to us. And so it's really hard to quantify the importance. And over the last 16, 18 months, Adam and I, as staff, have had a series of conversation of watching projects come through town and really taking a critical look at that, of going, okay, what are the types of tools that we can put in the toolbox for an applicant to get from point A to point B and really present something to us as a community and council that we're proud of, that we'd accept, and to give the council, not on a case-by-case basis of changing the general plan or making exceptions, giving you the tools to really to provide applicants of incentives, like what are you looking for in different types of projects. And so specific to some recent projects, the Corte Madera project was one of them, of really stepping back and saying, okay, what's important to the town and this council? And to really look and say, we need our hotels. Our hotels are important to us. Is it the end-all, be-all? No, but it's important to us from an economic development standpoint, and they've been a part of our community for decades. And so to step back and say, what is the appropriate then tool to provide both the council and the applicant success in evaluating things? And so really we look at the approach, and from our conversations as staff, of really looking at maybe incentives, saying, look, hotels are important to us, and looking at our general plan, and are there ways to incentivize our hotels to stay hotels? We don't dictate ultimately that they have to stay hotels. I don't, just personally as a town manager, I don't think that's something I would ever recommend to the council. I don't know that that's the right way of doing business as a town. It doesn't feel right to me. But I think it's absolutely appropriate to set incentives to stay hotels. And it's good for the council. The community then knows what the council stands for and what's important and what we're going to hold applicants to. And if applicants come in on incentives, for instance, environmental, amenities for the community, things like that, then council will consider on a case-by-case basis the FAR as an example. And so that's really what brought us here today. And so we're really looking for some feedback from council. Do you think we're headed down the right path? Is this something that interests you? And if so, are there some things that you would like us to consider to come back to you with specific to looking at this issue? Are you interested in incentives? And
I think the timing is great. I wish we
So should we
had
get
brought
public
this
comment
up.
first, and then
Well,
we'll do-
first questions and then
Okay.
Out to the public. Are there any questions of staff?
Go ahead.
If we do set up a special hotel zoning category, I'm not using the right word, but anyway, and it's applied to a parcel, would there be anything preventing that parcel from saying, I want to shift over to being an office as opposed to being a hotel?
Well, the zoning would be preventing that, so the allowable uses.
Okay.
So is that, yeah, I mean, I think what we're trying to do is, one of the advantages of the first three bullets up there is you're working within existing zoning districts that actually are already set up. And for example, the MX, I wanted to point out the one that, the MX1, which is the most recent zoning district that was applied to some of our commercial areas, that includes some incentives or bonuses in there already for achieving essentially greater density or intensity, as long as the project meets certain things. The other one there would be actually rezoning, so rezoning a parcel. And, you know, that's something that theoretically could be applied by the town. More likely, it's going to be an applicant, whether it's somebody from out of town coming in and finding a parcel that seems to fit and saying, oh, you have a zoning district that says I can get a hotel and a hotel at higher, and they're going to come in, and that would be a rezoning process for that parcel because, you know, I don't think we're, unless, you know, we'd have to figure out, unless we figured out on our own the precise parcels that for now and really set the policy in terms of what those sites or areas would be, that would allow that zone. So it's
We currently have 4 parcels
with existing hotels.
with
right?
hotels. And if we were to set up a hotel zoning and apply it to those 4 parcels, nothing would prevent them a year from now coming in saying, wait, I want my parcel to be office building. And it could be rezoned, right?
Well, I think it's more, nothing would prevent it, but I think the restriction would have, to put it in place in the first place, to actually go through the rezoning process, would have to be backed up by, again, this rational basis for the land use. And if all of a sudden somebody comes in after you've established there's the basis for that land being zoned for only hotels and comes back with an office use, that's going to create some conflict there.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, then I'd like to open it up to our public, our audience. Is there anybody that would like to make a statement? Mr. Kuhnhart?
Mayor.
I would just beg the council to remember a couple of things. Due process, number one. I think that it's very important for the town to set forth rules that are clear, that are consistent, that folks who either own property in town or would like to own property in town can respond to and not have to go through a specialized process to get there. Planning Commissioner Metcalf wrote to you, I think, a good summary. I don't want to speak on her behalf, but one of the points there, I believe, is that the worst way to go about it is to have the lowest density for hotels in the county and then negotiate with every single one, because that guarantees that the town will go through a 2 or 3 year process on every single one. And it's going to feel unfair, and people will come forward and say, well, the general plan says, and it's just going to be, a real headache and a nightmare. So if you choose to, I think the right way to go would be to choose to raise that number up for hotel use under a special permit, which you'd have to get for that hotel use. And I'm not sure what that density number is. If you look at all the other jurisdictions in Marin, some are over 1.0. I'm not sure whether 0.75 or 0.6 or 0.55. I'm not sure what the right exact number is. I would definitely want to get it close to double what the existing number is, because that's closer to the competitive scale of what going hotels are built to. And another consideration is that most of the districts where this might happen are essentially creating, if a building is a little more dense, it's creating a sound wall that saves most of the residential part of town from the sound impacts of 101. Another small point, very small point, is that a building gets built as a hotel. It's very hard to convert that to an office building because you've got a bathroom in every single bedroom unit, right? And offices rarely have that much plumbing. It's not going to be a simple redo. It would be a major redo that would cause a new application and a special permit violation. I'd also hope that we wouldn't make very many properties non-conforming. At least one will be non-conforming going forward that exists and recently put a lot of money into their renovations. I'd hope that and that's there at 0.8 or 0.83 or something like that. I would hope that the town would not end up with a policy that would have a lot of non-conforming properties. Similar to the last time I came before you, I wish we could continue that conversation. I hope you received my email on the issue of the quote downzoning of multifamily in the mixed-use districts. Yes? No? No? After the last meeting?
Yeah,
No.
You received it for sure.
I did.
Okay.
I'll get it.
Anyway, thank you very much for this
We'll get it.
opportunity. Thank you very much for this opportunity to come in.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Mr. Chase?
Peter Chase, Corte Madera. Just a quick note to say that this would be, I think, a tool in the toolbox. It by no means is a carte blanche for hotel development or anything, but it does provide an incentive, I think, for renovation and upgrading of properties that we have, instead of having to go for the zoning change with properties, for instance, some of the recent applications had to do. So this would take that off the table, allow them a faster process, but design, review, all those other things are still in place. It simply takes one troublesome element off the table. And I think that's a good benefit toward finding a number to reach. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, then we'll close it to the public, bring it back to the council. So let's start the discussion here. Who would like to start?
I will.
Okay, thanks.
Is your
I
mic
guess-
on, Jim?
Pardon?
Is your mic on? Oh, sorry.
It's on, but it's not near. I guess the way I'd like to approach it is if we had a hotel ordinance that sort of laid out sort of a baseline FAR, height, and lot coverage, and then over and above that with a conditional use permit, you get the FAR is high, I don't even know if we need to have a limit on the FAR. Same with the height. But the conditional use permit would be, is it sensitive to the general plan goal of, protecting nature? Is it good design? In particular, I know in our general plan we mention non-corporate design? Does it provide public amenities? Just, so, sort of a baseline and then an easy way to get above the baseline. Because if we went with that criteria, then even Marin Suites theoretically could, rebuild at its same density. So, with nature, one thing is, since much of the town is floodplains, encourage build the hotel on a pedestal with parking underneath, so that the sleeping areas are above ground, above the floodplains. That might be one way to do it. Anyway, those are my rough thoughts.
Okay, thanks, Jim.
So, just to be clear, are you talking about then changing regulations for all commercial? Is
No.
that what you're saying, or just the
I'm just
specific
saying-
hotel parcels?
I'm saying, here's our hotel zoning.
Right,
It would have, sort of a baseline FAR, a baseline height.
right.
Okay? But if you met certain criteria, your FAR could go way up, your height might go up, lot coverage would change,
Right.
but, I know that in many of these zoning questions, the issues come up, is, can we get good design? Well, if you limit somebody to 34 FAR, probably not. But if you sit there and say, okay, well, we'll be more creative with you,
Right.
but, we expect the following things from you as well.
Okay.
And it's coming up with that list of things we expect from them, which will be difficult.
Right. Okay. So, I'm going to ask Adam, may I ask a question?
Please, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit, and this is a really open-ended question.
Sure.
In your mind, the benefits of, to me, like, the issue here is, do you take the 4 parcels that we have and create regulations
Yeah.
for those 4 parcels? Or do you say, we're going to create regulations that we overlay on the whole commercial zoning and create incentives to build hotels? Is that a fair?
Yes, and
Yeah.
can I ask you guys one question before he answers that one,
Yes.
which is relates, so that's the same question I have, except
Okay.
there's a preface to it that I don't understand, which is, you can currently build hotels in other than those 4 parcels, on the other.
Absolutely.
Okay.
My next question,
Okay,
too.
so assuming that then Bob's thing.
Yeah, no, I would,
Let me
Yes.
let me just finish my question, though.
oh, yeah.
So, if you can talk about the relative benefits, maybe, or detriments
Sure.
of either one of those two, because, and to take the first one out to its logical conclusion, if we created incentives for the whole commercial district, Marin Luxury Cars could come to us, who has a huge lot, and we have this huge FAR, and they can say, we're going to build a huge hotel. Now, it has to fill all these other things, but, it would create those kinds of opportunities, potentially, correct? And he and I didn't even talk before the meeting.
Absolutely. No, I think my feeling is that there are a lot of advantages to having a more open-ended, allowing hotels in commercial districts that allow a variety of uses, and then providing some incentives for specific uses. That's actually how most of the other incentive-based hotel regulations that I've seen in other communities and other codes are set up. While I explained before, I'm not entirely against the idea of a hotel zoning district. I haven't seen another one specifically that just only limits parcels to hotel only. I think some of the advantages, obviously, is it's not as constraining, and that over time allows for some properties may find it during one economic cycle, an advantage to redevelop maybe a smaller hotel into something else.
if then there's a different economic cycle, that same parcel could then turn back into a hotel, or a different parcel right next door, would be able to use certain market cues to help determine what the appropriate land use is in a given area. So flexibility is important. I think we don't want to be put too many limitations or constraints on parcels, given that there may be unintended consequences by doing that. And I'd be somewhat concerned that it could, if you don't have the proper incentives, or you're missing you're not on the same wavelength as the ultimate decision maker in these real estate decisions, that you're creating almost an incentive to disinvest in properties or until something changes. So I do think, hopefully that answers gets at it. But I do think there are advantages to having hotels, if I'm saying, having hotels allowed in a range of commercial uses. So we have existing MX1 district, we have existing C3 district.
Hotels are in both of those?
Are one of
Or
the
allowed in
uses,
both?
yes, they're one of the uses that are allowed in all that district, those C3 district, the MX1, the C2s, the C1 districts. And then using incentives within those zoning districts to create those opportunities for the property owner to make decisions on their own to go there, if the market is so is
So
allows-
said
allows that to happen.
I just want to make sure I understand this. An existing C3 parcel currently is owned at a .34 FAR, but we create an overlay that says, but if you put a hotel here, you can have up to a .55 FAR and, maybe one or two of these other things, if that's what you decide to do, right?
Yeah.
That's what you're talking about?
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think it's really critical that we do incentivize the parcels that we have, so that we can maintain the hotel development that we have right now.
Well, but I'm sorry, can I respond to that? But I just want to be clear, the thing that Bob's saying, which I agree with 100%, but I'm cautious about, maybe I misunderstand this. The concept is not to just provide incentives to those 4 parcels. The concept is to provide an incentive which could be used not only by those 4 parcels, but any other parcel in a district which you could currently build a hotel, right? Or is your vision, see, that's why I just want to be clear, is your vision just for those parcels where there currently are hotels?
Okay, I think it's important that where there are the hotels, that those do have incentives built in.
Okay.
And, but on the other hand, I don't know how practical it is with all the other zoning designations to allow them to build hotels. I mean, it might work out great, but I think that it has, I don't see us being, all I think of is in San Diego, the hotel circle. In do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't.
The
Can you
big-
explain?
Okay, it's a great big, huge commercial circle, and it's just one hotel after another.
And it's a bad thing? Or it's a good thing?
Well, it
It's
certainly
sterile.
defines a neighborhood. There is no
Right.
neighborhood. All it is hotels.
I mean, it's very unattractive and inappropriate.
Well, they have some very nice hotels,
Oh.
but it's just a little bit odd
I see.
to see your landscape and all it is one hotel after another. So I don't know whether we're creating another problem, incentivizing every commercial property. I just don't think that every Tom, Dick, and Harry is going
Yeah.
to come in and want to build a hotel.
I don't think you're-
So I just, I don't think it's a problem, but I can't see that people will do it. I mean, it isn't even economically viable for them to do that. So I would say,
But it sounds like we'd have all these conditions that are part of the general plan that would have to be met as well, right? In order for the conditions to be met, in order for the conditional use permit to be met, because you would still need a conditional use permit because you're in a commercial zone, right?
Well, there's a set of.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. So, I mean, this is just one layer, right? And I think Peter Chase was referring to this. So there's one layer of we're just talking about FAR and what you can actually obtain in terms of the floor area ratio for a particular use. And that may be some unlimited number, as Councilmember Andrews mentioned, or some defined number that's yet to, I don't think we want to get into the specifics yet, but we can deal with those and come back to you in the public with something more specific in the future. But, so that is one layer. That sort of incentive structure could have attached to it in order to get to some number, 0.6, 0.55, whatever it is, 0.5 FAR, certain findings may need to be met, for example. And that's what's referred to as we have maybe you call it a special permit or something like that, with certain specific findings for that use are made in order to achieve that additional FAR. On top of that, you're going to have findings related to design review. Those don't go away. That's still, and so and then on top of that, findings related to conditional use permit, which gets into the operation of a particular hotel. Obviously, design review is related to the site plan and site. So there's multiple layers of findings that would exist for any hotel development. The FAR conversation is really about allowing more flexibility on that one aspect of a development on one of these parcels, or any parcels or the redevelopment. Does that, hopefully that question?
Sloan, did
I'd be
you have-
curious if you're willing, Diane. She usually has smart things to say.
Oh, gosh, now the pressure's on. All right, well, the first smart thing I'm going to say is if every one of those Tom, Dick, and Harrys you mentioned, Carla, comes into town and builds a hotel, just imagine all that money going to the Chamber of Commerce for 4th of July. We'll have the even better 4th of July. Okay, just kidding. But I did want to point out that our hotels are extremely important to our community. And I'm not sure that the general public really appreciates that. Not only do we get a not insignificant amount of money through the transient occupancy tax, the TOT, but as was mentioned, the economic hit boost we get from all those hotel occupants shopping, dining, and doing things in the community. But it's also a great service to our local residents if they are refinishing their floors or remodeling and need a place to stay for a while. Or if they have the in-laws in from out of town and they don't want them at their house. But not my in-laws, really. You know, people use the hotels. People in our community use the hotels for themselves and for their loved ones. So I definitely want to figure out a way that we can incentivize these 4 sites that are currently operating as hotels, to incentivize them to remain hotels when they are making a decision whether or not to improve or maybe change the use. So I'm going into this with that as my number one goal. How we do it, I'm still a little confused because, gosh, this is just, forgive me, it's, kind of like French. I just don't get it. So I'm leery about a separate hotel zoning district. I'm concerned that that might pigeonhole the 4 properties without offering enough incentives to other properties that Tom or Dick or Harry might purchase and want to build a little boutique hotel or something. It seems to me that maybe we can do it through the conditional use permit process in the commercial and mixed-use zoning areas that currently allow hotel use. And that, are you looking at something, Adam, that I should be?
No.
Okay. No, that's okay. I mean, if you want to butt in and point me to a particular spot in the report, by all means, interrupt me. But I would like to see incentives for FAR. I would like to see incentives for water saving and energy savings, maybe LEED or some other type of greening of the construction and operations. Community amenities that might be as simple as an increased setback with kind of almost like a little park type something in front that's attractive. Obviously, great design. Restaurant, a bar, spa, those kinds of things. I would love to see those kinds of things. I think our community members would love to see those kinds of things. So I would be ready and willing to accept an FAR well above what we currently have. There was the request for 0.55 from a local property owner, but I'm looking at this list. Great list, by the way. Extended Stay America is 0.9. Marriott Courtyard Novato, 0.64. Embassy Suites San Rafael, 0.74. I would guess 0.6 to 0.75 would probably be a range that I could accept if all of those other conditions were met and the design was sensitive to the neighborhood. So for instance, loading up an additional floor away from where it's going to impact people the most. Or conversely, like David Kuhnhart said, putting some height where some noise is going to be blocked. Anyway, things like that.
Sure.
Does that make sense? Anything I missed? Right.
He was smart.
That's pretty smart.
Oh, thank you.
Smart.
Wow.
So, you want to go or do you?
Go ahead.
Okay, so first of all, let me just thank Peter Chase again. Peter, your comments are always welcome here. You're a credit to our planning commission of the town. Thank you for your continued work there. So, it's uniform, right? We all want incentives of some kind to try to encourage, so that's easy peasy. And the kinds of things we want to incentivize, I think we're also uniform on. Community benefits of any kind, great.
The bar and the spa.
Yes. But I also mean the greening of the thing, and so okay. I would like to highlight the problem as I see it, because that's my role. And what I see is that it's not clear to my mind, and I'm inclined against isolating out specific properties, parcels, for these incentives or limitations or anything else. This is just what I see. I hate when we get into philosophy because it never works. We should stick to operational questions and specific questions. I'm real reluctant to. On the other hand, who was it? Was it Carla that said, but we got to watch out for unintended consequences? So if we broaden it to all properties, does that cause a different problem? So clearly we want to incentivize. We do not want to go the restriction. I'm super cautious about isolating these 4 properties and saying that's our hotel overlay or whatever. On the other hand, I'm cautious about, so listen, I'm useless in that regard, but I'm expanding it because I agree with Carla's comment that then, I mean, do we suddenly, this Corte Madera become like hotel capital of Berlin?
Well, if I may respond to that just
Yeah.
quickly. I mean, I think there are within our current structure, that's why we have different types of zoning districts. We have a C3 because that's a highway commercial zoning district. We have a MX1 because it's mixed use. There's certain parcel size minimums that we want for certain things. So if you can get at certain locations that may make more sense than others through the framework that we already have in terms of the zoning. That's it's going to differentiate. So the whole world and all of our commercial districts may not be appropriate for hotels.
Some of those districts may, though, and those ones we would focus on. Obviously, that's something that staff would have to come back and analyze and give you the reasons why we've come up with what we've come up with, and think, hearing some guidance, and then obviously talking to the planning commission, hearing from the public, and getting those comments and isolating those areas to the extent we can, so we don't get unintended consequences. That's a primary goal that we try to achieve.
No, I know, and you do a good job of that, Adam. I'm telling you my direction that we're going. And I appreciate David's comments as well as Diane's about the, I don't have an issue at all with raising the FAR for hotels to some number does not put it at a competitive disadvantage. Those are my comments.
Okay, thank you. Yes, and I concur with everybody and with the spirit of this thing. I think that it's really important that yesterday we have these incentives established. And I think that it will certainly be much more viable, and it would certainly, we don't need an office building, we really need the hotels. And like Diane pointed out, people don't realize how important they are. So I would, in summary, say yes, we agree to increase the FAR and to recommend amenities that would benefit the public. And you might zero, or you might assign certain properties that you feel are appropriate for this designation rather than every commercial spot in town. So I think you would probably be able to, just to be practical.
Right.
With that. But I think, does that, yeah.
I'm sorry, I know these guys had their hands up before
Oh.
me, but I
Oh,
do want to
sorry.
respond to that as well.
Sorry.
Well, one thing, if we add to the criteria of stuff that we look at in giving the hotel benefit, if we say something like the economic diversity of the town, because it looks like every parcel along 101 is suddenly going to become a hotel. We might want to step back and say, hey, no, we've got quite enough hotels in town. We need whatever else is there, Pilates studios or whatever.
Yes.
Just so long as they're not massage parlors, which is San Rafael's big problem right now.
I would concur with much of this. Absolutely, we need an incentive. I think that's the right way to think about it. Higher FAR makes sense. With clarity in whatever it is we write that stipulates that the FAR is not an entitlement, as we always say, it is a maximum, right? So we need to make that clear. So just because you're building a hotel doesn't mean you get this. You got to do some other things that get you there. The incentive structures, I think, are terrific. I would just add to those. One way I would talk about it is create an incentive for embracing the community instead of walling off the community. I thought that was one of the smart things that RH did, was they really embraced the community and are trying to bring the community into the building and make it part of it. And we should encourage hotels, I think, to do the same thing. And just a little small thing that I would add to it, in terms of LEED, I would create specific incentives for solar energy as well and solar panels to try to get that, because I think we should be leading on that as well. But in general, I think, yeah, I would agree with everyone else. Let's try to figure out how to encourage this with the overall goal of making Peter's job simpler and clearer so that it's, when he's dealing with this stuff, it's just a little easier from their standpoint to say, here's what you need to do, here's what you can't do.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thanks.
Adam, does that give you a pretty good idea?
Yeah, no, that was great.
Okay,
Thanks a lot.
thank you.
Appreciate that.
Thank you, good discussion. Then we'll move along to our next business item, which is the continuation of the discussion regarding future configuration of the Public Works and Engineering office space, and possibly direction to staff regarding opportunities to pursue a prefab public works building on town-owned property.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Peter Brown and I are going to give this report. I want to start off with a quick overview and really ask the council to consider some direction with us moving forward. And really, staff has been continuing to meet the past 2 weeks on the conversation really started with Public Works Engineering. As we continue to meet as staff and with our professionals, it's become really clear that it's a much broader kind of conversation. And so Peter will give an overview, but really what we're asking for is for input and feedback. Are we headed down the right direction? Also requesting that maybe we at least assign one council member, possibly two, to staff as we move forward and work through this process. As we have the mayor helping us with the intergenerational center, I recommend consideration of possibly the vice mayor and anyone else that may be interested in helping us through this process. And really what we're looking at is taking a step back and looking at our facilities as a whole, looking at, all of our town-owned properties, looking at staff and really trying to improve office space for our staff. Some of our staff members really don't have offices. As an example, our IT, our part-time IT
Our town manager
person
actually does.
well, I have an office now, yeah, thank you. But he works out of a closet. Downstairs is really, I shouldn't have said that in publicly, but yeah. And really, downstairs, as a community member, when a community member comes in and they need help from the town and they want to go through the permitting process, it's difficult enough. And going downstairs is real. You kind of want one-stop shopping. You don't want to go to multiple locations. You want to be in a nice environment, and you want to be able to get what you need quickly. And so really, staff is going to look at all of our facilities over the coming weeks, possibly months. And I'm really looking at planning, public works engineering, and building as a whole. Is there a way that we can house them together? And really looking at downstairs in a different kind of long-term mentality. And recognizing that, hey, our long-term infrastructure, we're focused on an immediate need, the staff that I just mentioned. At some point, we're going to have to look at our fire department over the coming years. And so we're going to look at our available space and really come back to you, similar to the modular type of perspective. I say it's modular, but it's a little bit more the prefab, and it's cheaper, but it's also something that's long-term. But really asking for some help from a council member or two, if you're willing to help us through this process and come back to you with a cost-effective plan moving forward. And it's something I just can't emphasize enough that as we look at the $53 million in infrastructure projects, who has to execute that? And you have to give them a space that they can execute it in. Our fire department, again, was actually overcrowded 5 years ago. And so with the consolidation, the primary station for that consolidated fire agency is Station 14 here. It's the building on the right. That houses our fire chief, our fire marshal, all of our battalion chiefs, the core units of our firefighters. They're housed there at that station. It's a critical station, and really what we're doing is we're moving, poor Peter, I don't know if he would have taken a job if he knew he was going to be homeless, but he's on that left side of that building there, the west portion. There's 2 offices available to staff. And really, when we look at long-term going into this next fiscal year, we're looking at Public Works Engineering. There'll be a request from staff to really expand from 3 to 4 and possibly 5. And so we don't have the staffing space for that. And so that's really the overview of that, and we're asking for, are we headed down the right path? Are you okay with attaching a council member to our group? And also, and I'll have Peter give me the dollar amount, but I'm also asking if we're headed down the right path, some spending authority of the town manager moving forward for the rest of the fiscal year in design review and to bring in some experts to really evaluate our needs and come back to you at some point with a recommendation. And with that, I'll turn it over to Peter.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, Peter Brown, Public Works. Thank you, Mr. Cusimano. I wanted to spend maybe about 5 or 8 minutes just talking about some of the site issues, and I think Todd already outlined what we're thinking about in terms of allocating workspace. So currently, at this portion where my white circle is here, there's two offices that are housing Public Works engineering staff. Those are slated to be vacated, and as Todd mentioned, this whole firehouse, built in 1966, slated to be turned over to firehouse and fire staff entirely. So one of the things to note as council members is, what we have before you is pre-preliminary drawing. So all we did in this particular case was look at town-owned property, which is basically this entire parcel here. This happens to also be a town-owned property. But what we did here is we said, okay, if we look at places where the gradients aren't very steep, where we can do things like minimize grading work that would need to be done, increase this interface between, say, the current planning and Public Works here, if this was an entrance to a new Public Works building. We also wanted to consider the property lines, boundaries, being good neighbors. All those things went into this particular drawing. But after recent discussions over the last couple of weeks, what we decided was that, as Mr. Cusmano mentioned, it's probably a good idea at this point to take a step back and look at the property entirely. Some of the things that came up in recent meetings are really doing a proper civil survey of the property. So one of the things, as you all know, we're right here, right now. The drop in elevation between here and, say, 20 feet this way is around 20 feet. So we have steep gradients here. We have an ADA access ramp. Obviously, this building would need to be ADA accessible. So, one of the questions is, do we meet current ADA? How would we do that with a new building? So that's just by way of saying that recent discussions have said, hey, maybe not where it's drawn up here, but if I could draw your attention to the screen, maybe this particular location is a location to consider. If we don't need to bring fire trucks through this whole area here, maybe this particular corner of town-owned property is a place to evaluate a future building. So everything's on the table at this point, and what I'm recommending with input from your planning director, your town manager, your senior civil engineer is, let's survey the property. Let's take some borings so we really understand what the geotechnical nature of substructure is. Let's do a proper civil engineering site survey, elevation change. Where would we best place a building once we receive those 2 or 3 reports back? So that's, an effort of probably $8,000 to $10,000 in studies just to really understand how we could be efficient moving forward. And then, I think the staff report outlines some of those soft costs. If we go into designing a building, going through design review, determining square footage, determining do we want to do a 1-story or a 2-story building, where does it best located? And then probably the most important discussion that we had in our most recent meeting is, what Todd alluded to in terms of how we interact with the public. So we have a very small counter space downstairs below this building. And really, if you're a member of the public and you're dealing with the town, you come here to get a permit, to get a plan review, to get something done. And whether it's Public Works or Public Works Engineering or the building official or the planning department, you don't care that much. You just want to come in and be served in a timely way and move on and do your business and get your permit or get your plan reviewed. So that's something that is of importance to us in really comprehensively understanding how we provide customer service, because ultimately, I know the planning director and I, and I'm sure Todd and all of you feel like our primary job is serving the public, right? So that's number one. We're actually customer service representatives. And so we really see this building as an opportunity to assess how we staff existing employees and maybe even more importantly, how we improve employee customer relations and interactions. So I guess the direction we're looking for in summary would be, I think your staff report points out a number of $250,000. I don't think we'll need that much to get these initial studies going. And I think with help of 1 or 2 council members really guiding us and coming back to you regularly, it would be a good process to begin. And then the other thing in connection with our prior item on the sales tax measure, one thing we may also want to consider is this type of investment may be something that before we launch full speed, we may want to find out what the results are of June. I think that's something else for us to consider, and I'll turn it back over to Todd.
And just one last thing, for spending approval and talking about where we're at, really how I look at this is a spending approval up to $50,000 at this point. I don't think we're even going to hit that, but I'm just picking a number that is at a certain point that ensures that we can work with council and get our preliminary information. One of the key decision points that we're working off of, so it'd be helpful to know, we really look at this building as it's historical, and it's something that has to be in our long-term plans as staff. Upstairs, we've renovated it, and we have a good model upstairs. We're really trying to fix downstairs as well as additional staff as we communicated. As a point of reference, we used to have Public Works engineering staff when we had a few extra employees across the street. That was approximately, I believe, 1,900 square feet. And we paid $80,000 in lease payments each year. So it gives you kind of a perspective of what the leasing market looks like and how we've tried to house staff in the past. And so with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions and get direction.
Okay, any questions? Any questions from our public? Okay, well, I know that I would like to continue working with the finding Park and Rec a new home and finishing up with the intergenerational center. Would somebody else be interested? Darn,
I'd be happy to do it.
Okay, good. So,
I'll do it as well, unless,
No, I'm maxed out.
okay, so,
okay.
so Jim and Diane for the Public Works? Does that work?
Yes, and are you comfortable with an appropriate spending level to get this started?
I'm fine with approving the whole 250 as long as you come in and report out at each council meeting during town manager reports, kind of where we are. I think doing the site evaluation and borings and everything else, we know what we're dealing with is really crucial. This is a long-term investment, so let's get it done right.
And do we have a sense of where the fire department will be in 10 years? No, I mean,
Yeah, no,
will that be knocked down and rebuilt?
So part of our 5-year plan is that we are going to have a structural engineer come in and evaluate. So now if we have that wing, we have enough office space. Really for that building, what we're going to look at is make sure it's earthquake safe, it's standing, so we'll have some analysis there. In the second story, it's really, it's about 3 to 4 feet too short, but those are sleeping quarters for our staff, and so that's what we're going to look at from the structural engineering standpoint. Can we improve the sleeping quarters at this building? And so that's what we'll find out soon, and really get some analysis and cost estimates for that. But really, that's a 5-year plan, and that's what we're looking at for that building.
So you aren't going to change the qualifications to firemen and they can only be short?
Well, it's funny you say that, because the other way of going downstairs, I thought I was going to have to purchase a helmet. I've hit my head on that ceiling like 3 different times, and so I'm like, make it a condition of employment.
So, I'm sorry to be a little different on this. 250 grand seems like an extraordinary amount of money where we don't know where we're going with this. I would prefer that we have a more modest entry level and then have the consultant work with you guys to come up with what a realistic budget is, both for his or her own fees and for the construction costs. That just, I mean, Jesus, 250 grand for design costs seems huge, but go ahead.
So, thank you, Councilmember Bailey. So just to be clear, the way that these prefabricated buildings work is what we call hard and soft costs. So the hard cost, the actual construction of the building, is set to be in that 700 to 850 range. The 250, really, you're right. That's meant to cover all kinds of things, including the architecture fees, design, a lot of your contracting work. That money wouldn't be spent in the near term in the next number of months. So we certainly could work with a lesser amounts for our studies and moving forward and come back. We're also, fine with any non-construction money, basically is what we're talking about.
So, I mean, I would feel more comfortable with that, guys. The other thing is, I would say, is part of the thing I really liked about your report was that you're not locked into this plan yet, right? It's a serious contender, and maybe this ends up being it, but for what it's worth, I think you should ask the consultant or get your own people, or you guys all have the right backgrounds, maybe you can figure it out. I would consider things like, what's the word they used in the 80s, synergy, right? To have your people just physically close to each other. Maybe it's better to have them in a different building, I don't know. Access to the public, also to have sort of a unified point of contact. In other words, when somebody comes in, if they want to see our town clerk, or they want to see public works, or they want to see planning, or they want to see building, to have I don't know if you can get it done in our spot, I don't know, but I'd rather have a broader perspective rather than just go there. I was going to compliment you on the sort of the open-minded approach. I would keep that lateral thinking going, and I would come back, my suggestion would be come back to the council with a more developed budget after having arrived at a concept that you think you can sell.
Very good. And we might recommend that maybe obviously up to the council, but that $50,000 range would give us plenty of leeway and as an amount not to exceed. Another conversation that we had was, we're stretched pretty thin at the staff level with all of our projects. This is something that would have some value in getting an independent assessment of. We're all pretty close to it, but there is also some value in hiring, a professional to come in, look at the results of these studies and really give us, an assessment that says, based on the fact that you want to do something in the near term, that you want to, save costs, that you have all these customer service needs. And really, since I wrote this report with Todd's help, where we talk about future configuration of a public works engineering office space, I think just in the last week and a half, it's not just public works. It really could be planning, it could be IT, it could be all of our customer interface. So we may even want to, open this up next time we come back and talk about, office space in general. And if some planning staff or maybe a front counter, a customer interface comes with this new building, maybe downstairs office would be freed up for public works. Everything's on the table at this point. So hopefully that helps respond to some of the questions brought up.
Now, is that going to, you would just come back and ask for more if this was too much of a hindrance?
Correct.
You need to be out of the fire station by the end of this calendar year, correct?
Well, originally, it was supposed to be the end of last calendar year. So need is a strong word. We'd like to get out of there as soon as possible, but the more we talk about this as being our one-time opportunity to do the right thing, it's probably more important to do it right than to do it right away.
Okay.
Still at the same time, there are, fire employees that are still in Larkspur that are waiting to come over here. But I think this is a critical enough issue, and I know Todd agrees that we'd like to get out by the end of the calendar year. Hopefully that happens.
Yeah.
I know there's another item on our agenda for later on. Is there a possibility that there'll be some open space where the engineering department could work for a little while until this build-out is done? They're really desperate.
Yeah, so we're looking at some temporary space potentials, as well as sharing space over here, so we'll figure it out. And I will say that as part of this analysis, and it'll continue, the town-owned house is one of those. And so we looked at it, what I think, from our standpoint as staff, we're really looking at, for a variety of reasons, and we'll report it out, that really we're not looking at that house for the next 3 to 5 years. There's a variety of reasons, cost, and some concerns of the neighborhood. But still, we have opportunities to house Peter and his team through this year.
Okay, all right.
Okay, Bob?
Not to beat a tune to the ground, but Sloan, I thought you made a lot of great points, and I really encourage you to do the approach you're taking, which is really step back, see what your objectives are, look at this thing holistically. And it might seem like a lot of money, but good design seems expensive, but pays for itself many, many times over in the long run. So my experience has been any kind of project like this, invest the money up front to, understand what you want and design it right, and you'll be in good shape from that point on.
So, Carla, may I comment on that? I agree 100% with that, Bob. But I think we got to get a deliverable. So before here's 200, I don't have any problem with 250 or whatever it's going to cost. You tell me what the real number is going to be. But if we're going to authorize 50 grand in exchange for, come back with like what it is then, like what's the plan and how much is that plan going to be? That seemed like a rational first step.
I wasn't talking about the budget thing.
Yeah.
I'm totally fine with the budget thing and going in a step-by-step approach too.
Okay. So we all have spoken, and you all know what to do from here? Okay, thank you. Okay, we don't have any sanitary district business tonight, so we'll go to our council and town manager reports. Todd, would you like to start?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Outside of our weekly newsletter, I just want to thank Peter Brown for really helping us with the town of Corte Madera requirements for public project contracts. I think one of the things to be critical of staff, of me, I think in the past few years, really delivering some of our projects, but in delivering our internal projects. A lot of them have come from on the Park and Rec side, and really having staff to help implement those projects and really go through the process the right way from start to finish. And so Peter has been really instrumental since he's been here of really putting in a procedure and protocol. And that's gone out to staff. If council hasn't seen it, I'll send it again, but we have a protocol now, a policy to follow. And really, whenever we have an internal project, you have all the stakeholders among staff to really discuss it from start to finish and to ensure that it's implemented and it's implemented the right way and it's delivered as expected, under cost, and on time. And so it's been a huge focus, and this procedure that's been put in place is really important to that. The second one is I wanted to bring your attention, you may have seen this, we had a Central Marin Police Authority council meeting recently, and the chief forwarded this to us. This was a tweet he sent out a while ago, and this is a day shift staff, and it was staff from the supervisor down of an all-female police shift. So pretty cool, first time in the history of Central Marin Police Authority. So it was a pretty awesome story. On the police authority side, something we've talked about in the past and was discussed at the police council level, two important topics. One has been to really situate and get our insurance fund balanced. And over the years, we went into a negative deficit due to a series of lawsuits and mostly workers' comp claims. And so the council approved for the managers to come back to our respective councils, and so that'll be coming to you in March, of an additional expenditure, mid-year expenditure of, I believe it's $60,000 from the town of Corte Madera and each entity to fully fund the insurance fund. And at the end of this fiscal year, we will be balanced and we have a plan moving forward. And the second item is we had a social host, and I'm sure Bob will touch on this as well, but we had a presentation on our social host ordinance from our local coalition. And they're going to be coming to all the respective councils. They're starting in San Anselmo and will work their way to Corte Madera for the council to consider and ultimately amend our social host ordinance to include additional amendments specific to marijuana and other items that Bob can certainly touch on. Also, we'll be coming to you in March for a presentation from the county in San Rafael on the mobile showers, and it's part of our homeless program and initiative and some of the things we're talking about. And so they're going to come in and give a 15-minute presentation. And again, Bob has been instrumental in getting that to Corte Madera. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Okay. Okay, thank you. Then council member reports. Do you want to start, Bob?
Sure. Busy couple of weeks. We had a BPAC meeting. Peter Brown made his first appearance. Thank you, Peter. Great job. We covered 9 different projects in less than 2 hours. Two of the most notable We saw the first take on Sanford and Casabuena, changing circulation. That's that
Yep.
ridiculous intersection over by Pete's with the yield sign and nobody knows what to do.
Yes.
So we saw some good, takes on that. That's moving forward, and we also had our first look at a complete streets project outline for Tamil Vista. So the goal would be to try to, accomplish what we did on Tamil Pius, another look at Tamil Vista. Disaster committee, disaster preparedness committee meeting. We had Ruben, our new fire marshal, spoke, which was terrific. Great attendance at that. And then also, I just wanted to quantify, I've been talking about, we hired the John and Lee Howard June 1st, 2017, to take over the NRG response groups. I just wanted to quantify this a little bit for you. I said they've been doing really well. They have started 10 new neighborhood response groups in Larkspur and 8 in Corte Madera since they have started. Unfortunately, they're only going through June, so we need to find a replacement. But we now have over 4,000 households in the Twin Cities enrolled in neighborhood response groups, and this program is really starting to roll and is a critical component, I think, in disaster preparedness for the town. So we're really proud of the progress we're making on that. And finally, the coalition, you'll be hearing more from us. We're trying to get the social host ordinance updated to include marijuana. We're working through CMPA. And finally, we're going to be launching another program. We got a lot of programs we're launching, but one you will be seeing a lot of is we are trying to, what I would articulate as, the program is called Raising the Bar, but the idea is that any kind of youth-oriented party or celebration around sports, if it's about children, that it not include alcohol. And the suggestion here is just that we're trying to create what we consider appropriate modeling behavior. And we are signing up various organizations. So the Sleepy Hollow Swim Team, West Marin Baseball, we're going to be going to Twin Cities Little League and getting everybody to sign up for that, so that if there is a party or at the end of season gathering and it's about the kids, we're asking that it also just be substance-free. And we're going to be launching that with advertising, but also just a lot of one-on-one meetings. So that's what's new there. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Jim?
Well, I attended the Flood Control Board, and they're continuing to plan infrastructure build-out in anticipation of the budget that'll be coming up in June. One project they'll probably be pushing for sooner rather than later is they want to, Eli, correct me if I'm wrong, but they want to do slot drains over in Mariner Cove, is it, or?
We're continuing it there, and we're looking at picking up again in Marina Village.
Okay, so extending the slot drains over in that part of town, so.
Okay.
Good.
Thank you. Diane?
Yes, I attended a bunch of meetings, but I'll touch on 3. First of all, at the Transportation Authority of Marin, we had a very difficult decision to make about shifting funds away from the southern segment of the North-South Greenway. In fact, I think Peter had mentioned this at our last meeting. The southern segment is the one that was going to go behind Cost Plus, down along our detour curve, and wind up at Warnham and Redwood Highway so that cyclists and pedestrians could go down Warnham and meet up with the Sandra Marker Trail, or continue on the Redwood Highway pathway, towards the village. It's something that I've been working on for years, and I was really disappointed that we lost our funding. However, the funds needed to shift for a couple of very good reasons. Number one, the northern segment of the North-South Greenway project, which is the one that goes from Sir Francis Drake Boulevard down to over the creek and lands on Redwood Highway and ends at the pedestrian overcrossing that crosses over and lands over kind of by Big 5. That is over budget by an unbelievable $3.5 million, and I would like to find out more information about that. I'll keep you
how much?
posted. I don't know, is about 11 million, so quite a bit.
30%
Quite a bit.
Okay.
A lot of that had to do with the regulatory agencies dealing with the wetland impacts. And believe it or not, they had to install a filter system for the rain runoff off of the pathway along the freeway off-ramp. So it's like filtering the rain runoff, if you can believe it. This is what we're spending a lot of this money on. Anyway, so 3.5 needed to shift from the southern segment up to the northern to get that project finished. But in addition, and this is really key, with the Sonoma Marin Area Rail Transit, the SMART train, coming from San Rafael to Larkspur, hopefully by the end of this year or next year, there's really a very limited window to build a multi-use path right adjacent to the rail. And remember, SMART was always intended to be a rail and a trail project. But if SMART is going forward with the rail, if the pathway isn't built now, it's not going to get built. So San Rafael and the county and SMART and everybody had to come up with the funds for that trail. So they were short, and they're transferring about $3 million from the southern segment of the Greenway to San Rafael just to get it done. So that means in the future, TAM and various other stakeholders will need to come up with some new sources of funding for the southern segment of the Greenway. Disappointed, but we'll get it done. In addition, the town of Larkspur, or the city of Larkspur, has taken on ownership of an improved pathway along Redwood Highway from the pedestrian overcrossing down, presumably to Warnham. So at least we'll get some safety enhancement along there. I attended a Safe Routes to School Task Force meeting. I want to share with you that Redwood High School this year has really been pushing for carpools of 3 or more students. And they are incentivizing the kids by giving them primo parking, which is a big deal on the campus of Redwood. So it's been fairly popular, and we're hoping that they're going to be able to ramp this up over the next couple of years. Also at Safe Routes to School, we discussed the crossing guards. Funding for the crossing guards is really tight, and every year, really key intersections are losing their crossing guards because there's just limited amounts of funding. The Transportation Authority of Marin is likely to go out in November for a renewal of the half-cent transportation tax here in the county. At this point, I believe they are not increasing it. It is just simply a renewal. They're renewing it a little bit early because it will allow them to change some of the percentages of where they allocate the funds so that they can do things like fund the crossing guards at a slightly higher rate. So I think Diane Steinhauser, Executive Director of TAM, Transportation Authority of Marin, will probably be coming to a meeting soon to talk more about that. And finally, I wanted to share, as part of my responsibilities on the board of Central Marin Sanitation, I represent CMSA on the North Bay Watershed Association, and they are having an all-day conference that I thought you all might be kind of interested in. The topic is Extreme Future, Fire, Floods, a Rising Bay. Keynote speakers are Grant Davis, Director of California Department of Water Resources, our Congressman Jared Huffman, and the Executive Officer of the California Coastal Conservancy. This is on April 6th from 8 to 4. It's at the Sheraton in Sonoma County. There is a fee if you register before March 1. It's $95 per person. More information can be found on the website of the North Bay Watershed Association, which I believe is NBWA something. There you go. Thank you.
Okay.
Just 2 quick things. I did attend a legislative committee meeting for Marin County Council of Mayors and Council members. Things remain in flux. I don't have a detailed report for you. If you don't mind, I'm going to put that off and report better at the next council meeting when I have my notes in front of me. And likewise, there was a Marin Clean Energy Board meeting, which I attended, and the most significant thing of which we've passed another budget for the upcoming year of a whopping amount of money, but the Marin Clean Energy is financially healthy and putting away significant reserves, somewhere in excess of the recommended capitalization requirements, and all is good, no intent to raise rates anytime soon. And then the third thing is, hopefully, Carly, you'll mention that I think our town's hosting the next meeting for.
I have that on my list.
Great.
Yes. Okay, thank you, Sloan. First of all, I attended the crab feed sponsored by the Lions Club. It was a sellout and a huge, delicious success. Also attended police council, and you heard good reports about that. Tomorrow is the third Wednesday Speaker Series, which is sponsored by our Park and Rec Department, Twin Cities Village, and Age-Friendly Corte Madera, Age-Friendly Solutions. And the topic is caring for the caregivers. So if any of you are caregivers for somebody or know somebody who might be, it would be really interesting to hear about that. On February 28th, as Sloan mentioned, it is the Marin County Mayors and Council Members monthly dinner. We are the host for it, and we are following the direction of the supervisors that proclaimed 2018 as the age of the older adult. And so we will be having someone from either one of the supervisors or an aide will be speaking to that. And then also Patty Stolier will be giving a presentation along with Jody Timms, who is from Fairfax, who's been very instrumental in the success of Age Friendly. And I will have just a short PowerPoint relating to our intergenerational center. And with that in mind, I want to announce to everybody that we have a grand opening date.
Oh.
April 29th from 2 to 4 will be, it's a Sunday, will be the grand opening. You can see what is evolving. It's almost going to be completely done, but we will be starting the programs actually before that. And we have, I think, quite an impressive schedule of programs that we already have in line. There's going to be chair yoga, crafts, storytelling to preschoolers, a movie book club that will be of interest to of all ages, a popular new movie, and then discussing the book and how the book related to the movie. We will have teens helping seniors or not seniors, it doesn't matter, with electronics. We will have a space for seniors to play games, whether it be cards, puzzles, or just to hang out. There is a space just designated for that. And if I can read my writing, I can't. But anyway, this is just going to be actually a skeleton program, and then we'll see how it works, because we don't get the entire space that we're hoping for, because we're allowing Mario to be pushed out of his space, and they'll all be operating out of a little tiny space until we find what I'm hoping will be a double wide, something like that they will be able to work out and end up with more space and their own bathroom facilities and a better view out to the park. So anyway, we're really excited about it. We have a lot of interest already shown, and really thanks so much to staff who has just been phenomenal in getting this off the ground, and it's become a reality. So I invite everybody on April 29th, 2 to 4, to come for food, entertaining, little vignettes set up that you can see what will be going on. And I think it'll be a great thing for our community. And that is all I have to report. So, I would like to close right now to close session. If there are no further
Review the agenda.
questions. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, any suggestions, changes, or anything for the draft for the next meeting? No? Okay, then with that, I will adjourn our meeting to close session. Thank you all for coming.